I was just trying to buy a small gift and something simple, something meaningful. But then I saw her. Jade, my daughter. She stood by the perfume counter, dripping in designer labels, laughing with her new stepmother. Her eyes landed on me. Cold. Dismissive. She walked over, glanced at my shoes, then hissed, "Don't act like you raised me. You were barely a mother." I didn't flinch. I reached into my purse and pulled out the file I never leave behind. "Funny," I said. "For someone I barely raised, you sure cost me everything." Subscribe for more powerful true life stories. People see me now and think I've always been like this. Quiet, small, plain. But they don't see the years that nearly swallowed me whole just to keep Jade's life from falling apart. They don't know what it took to raise her alone. Rick, my ex-husband, left us when Jade was barely 3. One morning, he packed a bag and said he was going to the store. He never came back. No note, no goodbye. Just silence. I waited. I called. I begged. Nothing. At first, Jade would ask about her daddy. I told her he was away working, hoping he'd come back before she realized the truth. But time doesn't lie to children. By the time she turned 5, she stopped asking. The light in her eyes dimmed a little more each year. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. I worked 3 jobs, waitressing at a diner, cleaning houses, and stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store. I barely slept. Some days I couldn't feel my feet from standing too long. My hands cracked from scrubbing floors. But every time I saw Jade's little drawings on the fridge or her sleeping face, I reminded myself, this is worth it. She's worth it. I still remember the day she got sick, pneumonia. Her tiny body burned with fever. I didn't have a car back then. I carried her through 2 buses to get her to the clinic. We were turned away because I didn't have enough for the full payment. I begged the receptionist through tears until a nurse snuck us into a back room and said, "No one should be denied help, not a child." That bill? It's in the file. Every cent. When Jade started school, I made sure I was always there, even when I had to skip sleep or risk being late for work. I braided her hair, packed her lunch, and cheered the loudest at her spelling bees. She'd always look for me in the crowd. For years, I was her everything. But the older she got, the more embarrassed she seemed by me. She didn't want her friends to see the patched-up shoes I wore, or the way I paid with coins. I remember once, at a parent-teacher conference, she tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Can you not talk much? You sound tired." I didn't take offense. I just smiled. I was tired. But I never missed a school play, a birthday, a scraped knee. I didn't have much, but I gave her all I had. Then came high school. That's when the distance between us grew. She started hanging out with kids from wealthier homes. She'd come back complaining that their houses were big, that their moms didn't clean other people's bathrooms. She asked why we didn't have a car, why our couch had rips, why I wore old shoes. I didn't have good answers, just the truth. "Honey, I'm doing my best," I'd tell her. But sometimes, your best isn't shiny enough to compete. Still, I pushed forward. I saved every school photo, every honor roll certificate, every handmade Mother's Day card. I paid off medical bills slowly. I bought used clothes and sewed them to look new. And every night, I prayed she'd understand someday. Now, watching her mock me at the mall as if I were nothing more than a stranger, it felt like I failed. But I didn't come empty-handed. That file in my purse? It holds more than paper. It holds proof. Receipts for school supplies, hospital bills, rent stubs, court documents where I begged for child support Rick never paid, and printouts of every job I worked, every pay stub I stretched. No, I wasn't the perfect mother. But I was there, every single day. And if she wanted to rewrite the story, I wasn't going to let her do it without the truth standing in front of her. She may not see me, but I've always seen her. And I've always known. One day she'd look back and remember who kept the lights on when the world turned dark. By the time Jade turned 16, I started noticing a shift. It wasn't sudden. It was like the way fall turns to winter. You don't feel it at first, but one day the air just bites a little colder. She had always been a little distant as a teenager. Most kids are. But this was different. Jade didn't just pull away. She hardened. It started with the questions. Why don't we have a real car? Why do you always wear the same coat? Why does everyone else get to go on vacations? I answered as gently as I could. Because we make do with what we have. Because I work hard so you can focus on school. But those answers never seemed enough. Not anymore. She began comparing me to the other mothers. The ones with French manicures and SUV keys dangling from designer bags. Moms who showed up to school meetings in heels and perfume, not in scrubs with bleach stains and tired eyes. One day, she didn't want me to pick her up anymore. I'll walk, she said flatly, slipping her earbuds in and ignoring my confused look. That night, I sat at the table alone with 2 plates of dinner, hers cold, mine untouched. I waited, thinking maybe she'd come around, but she didn't. She was too busy texting or scrolling or sighing loudly every time I opened my mouth. The distance became our new normal. She started staying over at her friend Carla's house more often. Carla's parents had money. They lived in a large house with white furniture and marble floors, the kind Jade used to admire in magazines. I didn't stop her. I thought maybe she just needed space. I figured she'd come back when she missed home. But every time she returned, she brought back a little more bitterness. She'd throw digs I wasn't ready for. I wish I had a real family. You just settled for this life, didn't you? No wonder Dad left. That one stung. Not because it wasn't cruel, but because I knew she meant it. She didn't know what it was like for me after Rick left. How I'd sat on the bathroom floor crying silently so she wouldn't hear. How I'd taken jobs I didn't want just to pay for her ballet classes, her braces, her school trip to D.C. She didn't know that I once sold my mother's ring, my only keepsake, so I could buy her a prom dress that wouldn't embarrass her. She never asked, and I never told her. I guess I believed that love was quiet, that it didn't need to be proven, but now I wonder if staying silent was a mistake. Her resentment only grew. She started calling Rick's parents, people who'd never once visited her, as Grandma and Grandpa. They lived in a gated community and sent her birthday cards with money. That was all it took for Jade to believe they cared. I remember the first time she brought up Rick. He reached out to me, she said one night while scrolling on her phone. At least he wants to get to know me now. I looked at her. After all this time? And you believe him? She shrugged. Maybe he had his reasons. Maybe you pushed him away. That was the first time I felt my breath catch, like someone had punched me right in the chest. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked away. Because how do you defend yourself when your own child believes you were the villain in your own sacrifice? I never stopped loving her, even when she refused to come home for Christmas. Even when she sent a single text on my birthday that read, "Hope it's decent." Even when I saw pictures of her online, laughing, glowing, arms around her father and his new family, I just kept working. I kept saving those receipts, those court letters, those proof of payments. Not to use them against her, but to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining everything I did to raise her. Still, nothing could prepare me for how far she'd go. She stopped introducing me as her mother altogether. Once, at her school award ceremony, I overheard her say to someone, "That's just Helen, she's someone who helped out a lot when I was younger." That moment, it started with a phone call. I was folding laundry when my phone rang. I picked up expecting it to be a telemarketer, but it was Jade. Her voice was soft, almost nervous. "Mom." He called me. "Dad." I froze. For a second, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because 100 things raced through my mind. After all these years, now he decides to show up? What did he say? I asked calmly, sitting down slowly on the bed. She took a deep breath. He said he's been trying to reach me for years, that he was kept away. My heart sank. Kept away? By who? "You, obviously," she said. "He said you turned me against him." I felt like someone poured cold water over my entire body. I wanted to scream, to tell her how many nights I cried over the phone trying to reach him, how many letters I sent, unanswered, how I showed up at his sister's house begging for child support, only to be told to move on. But instead, I whispered, "That's not true, Jade." She didn't believe me. From that moment, something changed in her. I saw it in her eyes the next time she came to visit. There was no warmth, no awkward affection, just distance. Her hugs, when she gave them, felt staged. Her conversations were clipped. Then she started spending time with Rick, dinners, weekends. Eventually, she moved in with him and his new wife. Just like that. He had a nice house, of course, 2 stories, pool in the backyard. His new wife, Cynthia, wore pearls and spoke like she lived in a magazine. Jade loved it. She bragged about how they took her shopping, introduced her to their friends, and even bought her a new car. "They're making up for lost time," she told me. "They're doing what you never could." I smiled on the phone, but my chest tightened so hard I thought it might cave in. What she didn't know was that Rick never paid a dime of child support. I had gone to court 3 times trying to get help from him, but he always claimed he was unemployed, or between jobs, or financially incapable. The judge warned him once, but nothing ever came of it. Every pair of shoes she wore, I bought them. Every school supply, every flu shot, every broken tooth, I paid for it. I even paid to replace a broken phone she dropped in the toilet, because she said, "All the other kids have working phones." But now, Rick was the hero. One afternoon, I ran into our old neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn. She used to live across the hall when Jade was small. She told me she'd seen Jade at the supermarket with Rick. "She looked right through me," Evelyn said. "Pretended like she didn't recognize me, just like her father used to do." I smiled sadly. "I guess the apple doesn't fall far." Evelyn patted my arm. "You did your best, Helen, I remember. You were always the one dragging groceries up 3 flights of stairs, never complaining. She doesn't know what you gave up for her." No, she didn't. But that was the point of motherhood, wasn't it? You do the work quietly, without applause. Still, I kept everything. I had this worn blue folder filled with every scrap of proof: bills, receipts, eviction notices with her name on them, hospital forms, even the court petitions where I begged Rick to help just once to buy her asthma medication. I told myself I wasn't saving them for revenge. I just needed to remember that I hadn't imagined the weight I carried, that the burden had been real. Rick didn't have that folder. He had stories. He had charm. He had money now. And Jade ate it up. The worst part? She started to rewrite history. She told her friends I was just around, that her dad had been absent, but not by choice, that I made things harder. At her graduation, I showed up and stood in the back. She never looked for me, didn't mention me in her speech, but she thanked Rick and Cynthia for stepping up and showing me what a real family is. I didn't cry. I stood and clapped with the rest of the audience. I went home that night and opened the folder again, tracing my fingers over the yellowed paper, and I promised myself, if she ever accused me again of not raising her, I would speak. Not with anger, with facts. And they were all right there in my bag, waiting for the day she'd push me too far. That day was coming. I could feel it. You'd think I'd be used to the humiliation by now, but no matter how strong you are when it comes from your own child, it never stops cutting. The first time it happened in public, Jade had just started her first job at a fancy real estate firm. She was hosting an open house in a high-end neighborhood, and I decided to surprise her with a small bouquet. Nothing extravagant, just some sunflowers wrapped in brown paper. She looked shocked when she saw me walk in. Not the happy kind. The kind of shock people get when someone shows up uninvited. I smiled, held up the flowers. "Just wanted to say congratulations, baby." Her coworkers were all around, dressed sharp, sipping wine. Jade's face hardened. She stepped forward, took the bouquet quickly, and whispered through gritted teeth, "You could have told me you were coming. You don't exactly fit in here." My cheeks burned. I nodded, stepped back, and said, "I just wanted to show I'm proud of you." She didn't respond. She just turned back to her guests, laughing loudly like I didn't exist. That was the day I learned to stop showing up unless I was invited, and even then, to keep my presence small. But Jade didn't stop there. At her 25th birthday dinner, I was invited, surprisingly. Rick and Cynthia hosted it at a sleek restaurant with a private room. The table was long, full of her father's family, co-workers, and friends. I wore my best dress, an old navy blue one I'd kept pressed for special occasions. When someone asked who I was, Jade answered without missing a beat. "Oh, that's Helen. She used to help raise me." Used to help? I stared at her across the table, wondering if she even realized what she'd said. But her eyes were cold, her posture confident. She had erased me in front of everyone. I didn't make a scene. I never do. I just smiled softly, pushed my chair back after dessert, and left without saying another word. The worst moment, though, the one that really stung, was at her company's charity gala. She was being honored for her work in affordable housing. Irony, really. She gave a speech on stage in a glittering gown, thanking the people who shaped her. She thanked Rick, Cynthia, her mentors, her college advisor. I stood at the back of the ballroom near the exit. My name was never mentioned, not even a glance in my direction. As she stepped off stage, she passed by me, barely making eye contact. I whispered, "You looked beautiful up there." She nodded politely. "Thanks for coming." Like I was just another guest. When I got home that night, I sat with the folder again. Inside was the receipt from when I bought her that winter coat she cried over in middle school, when we couldn't afford heat for a week, and I found a used coat 2 sizes too big but warm enough to get her through. There was the emergency bill from the time she fell off her bike and split her chin. I rushed her to the ER without insurance, and the hospital billed me for over $800. I paid it in small amounts for a year and a half. There were printouts from her high school tuition payments, the time she needed braces, the extra tutoring I found so she could pass math her junior year. All of it. Every scrap. From me. Not Rick. Not Cynthia. Me. I wasn't keeping this folder for revenge. I was keeping it because I needed to remind myself I wasn't crazy. That I had been there. Through it all. I never expected Jade to throw her arms around me in gratitude. But I never imagined she'd deny me in front of others, reduce me to a distant helper, a background character in her success story. Still, I said nothing. Because I was waiting. Waiting for the moment she'd cross a line she couldn't come back from. Waiting for the moment she'd say the one thing I couldn't stay silent about. And when that moment came, at the mall, with a crowd around us, her words like knives, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I opened my bag, and I showed her the truth. The mall wasn't even part of my plan that day. I had a coupon from a friend, $20 off a fragrance I liked but couldn't usually afford. It was my small treat. Just something nice for me, for once. I walked into the store quietly, feeling a little out of place as usual. The women around me wore heels and handbags worth more than my rent. I kept to myself, head down, clutching my folded coupon in one hand and my purse in the other. And then I heard it. Laughter. Familiar. I looked up. Jade. She was standing by the perfume counter, radiant in a cream blazer and heels, her hair pinned back perfectly. On her arm was Cynthia, Rick's wife, dressed just as elegantly, holding a branded shopping bag. They looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. I froze for a second, not sure if I should turn around or wave. But Jade saw me first. Her expression shifted instantly, from surprise to disgust. She stepped away from the counter and walked right up to me, eyes scanning me head to toe like I was a stranger. "What are you doing here?" she asked, not a trace of warmth in her voice. I held up the coupon. "Just picking up a gift for myself. It's on sale." She scoffed, loud enough for Cynthia to hear. "Of course it is." Then she stepped closer and, in a voice loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear, she said, "Don't act like you raised me. You were barely a mother." My heart thudded in my chest. The words echoed, sharp and public. People nearby turned. Someone even gasped. I stared at her, not in anger, but in a sadness so deep it felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. I looked at her face, my daughter's face, and realized she didn't see me anymore. Not really, but that was fine. I didn't need her to see me. I just needed her to see the truth. Without saying a word, I set my purse down gently on the perfume counter. My fingers unzipped the worn fabric, and I pulled out the faded blue folder I always kept with me. It wasn't fancy, just something I'd carried for years. Proof of a life lived, sacrifices made, and a love that never once asked for applause. I opened it. The first thing I pulled out was the hospital bill from the night she had pneumonia at age 6. I placed it down. Then the braces payment slip, $1 and $200 over 14 months. I placed that next. School tuition records, rent receipts, receipts for every backpack, every winter coat, every emergency doctor's visit. I laid them down one by one like cards in a game only I knew how to play. Jade stared. Cynthia frowned, confused. The shoppers were dead silent. I finally looked her in the eye and said calmly, "Funny. For someone I barely raised, you sure cost me everything." Her mouth opened, then shut. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't angry. I was done. "I carried you through the snow to the clinic when no one else would help," I continued softly. "I worked nights so you could have lunch money. I stood in court begging for support from a man who walked away without a second glance. And I never once asked you to thank me." I lifted the last document, an old photograph of her as a little girl, missing her 2 front teeth, holding my hand at the park. "I never wanted recognition," I said. "I just wanted you to know I was there, even when it cost me everything." She looked stunned. For the first time in years, she had no comeback. People around us were still watching, but I didn't care anymore. I packed the papers back into my folder, zipped my purse, and looked at her one last time. "I don't need you to love me, Jade, but don't you ever lie about me again." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't buy the perfume. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us share more emotional, powerful stories like this one.